I know where they are.
Talking about transitions of one sort or another. How do we transition to a different sort of society? How do we transform to a different sort of society? With an extra sense of urgency. There have always been people talking about transitioning to a new society, but this time we're doing it not just because it's a nice idea, but because it's a simple matter of survival. One of the things that we find, and I think this is really important for community workers, pretty well all those writers put their faith in community. They don't put their faith in governments being able to make the sort of changes. They put their faith in community action. Naomi Klein says, what's going to stop this dreadful stuff that's going on is the community groups that are springing up all over the world to oppose the extractive industries, to stop the pipelines, to do this and that and the other. People writing about the economy are saying it's the changes that happen at community level that are going to create alternatives that might work. We see this sort of theme coming through again and again, the need to reclaim democracy, as I said, Clive Hamilton writing about climate change. By reclaiming democracy, they mean bottom-up democracy. They mean empowered communities. Because I think, really, you can't see anywhere else where change is going to come from. We can't see it coming from our political leaders at the present time. So this says something to me very, very important for community development, for community workers. We're actually where the action is. We're actually doing work that is vital for the future, for the kinds of transitions towards the future that we can lose sight of because we're involved with our little community programs in some town somewhere. But it's the sum total of all those little community programs in those towns, wherever they are, that sow the seeds for these alternatives to happen. When there's a global economic collapse, an awful lot of people are going to be saying, hell, what are we going to do? If there's some sort of viable local let's scheme that people can then go to and become part of and support and encourage and help to grow and become a major economic operator in that community, they're going to be much better off. So the people who are working on those sorts of economic alternatives now are doing really important work. We have to recognise the importance of Indigenous wisdom, how Indigenous people have lived in this country for an awful long time, and they know how to live in it. And they know they have answers that big mainstream Western society has lost. Yet we're eroding Indigenous societies. Indigenous societies are facing all the challenges that we know about. We should be learning from the experience of Indigenous wisdom. Some of you will have heard me say before, I hate the rhetoric of close the gap. Close the gap says, we're better than they are. They've got to close the gap and be like us. It accepts white fella definitions of health, of education. So education means sending kids to school, of housing, of all the rest of it. And then it's assimilationist. It's not what we should be doing at all. If anything, we should be reversing the gap and saying, actually, maybe it's mainstream society with a deficit that needs to come up. There is an increasing awareness that Indigenous people have got a lot to teach the rest of us. And a number of you have heard me do this before, but I'll give a plug for the publication that I've been involved with, which is coming out next year. It will be an entirely Indigenous authored book on community development. There's a whole group of Indigenous community work writers who are producing a book on Indigenous community development. Its title is Mia Mia, it's M-I-A, which is Noongar for our place. So if it's cultural transformation that's required, the cultural in community becomes really important, and community cultural development becomes important. Not a community development that mimics the dominant culture, but rather the one that establishes those alternatives and that revels in difference and diversity. It says diversity is at the centre of our work. None of this in unity is strength nonsense. In diversity is strength. Similarly, if it's economic transformation that's needed, we need communities with alternative economics. If it's political transformation that's required, we need communities with alternative politics. The core belief, I think, of community workers, which has been borne out again and again by our experience, is that these transformations will only work if they're driven from below, not from above. It's in communities that alternatives can be articulated and tried out. And it's most likely that alternatives will come from the margins. It's the communities that have already been bypassed by the global economy where we're most likely to see alternative economics developing, and so on. So the work that we do with communities at the margins is the site for the most innovative work.